What is the most freaking useless thing that they teach in school? Left brain versus right brain. Not only is it not true, it just divided all the kids from smart kids to art kids. No need for that. Similar to how some teachers still teach that different parts of the tongue taste different tastes, even though that can be disproven just by eating something. Character counts. It was our school's motto. The school also actively punished honesty and integrity when it mattered, and instead held award ceremonies for students who showed basic human decency, like, hey, you dropped this in the hallway, here you go. You would get awards for not being a piece of crap. But if you decide to show any real character, like stepping up for your friends when they're in trouble, you get detention. Let it be known, Erindale Secondary School in Ontario, Canada is a crap hole. How to take care of a baby by 1. Bringing in an egg. 2. Having the teacher sign the egg. 3. Decorating, protecting, and carrying the egg at all times for 2 days. 4. Revealing to the teacher at the end of day 2 that the egg was still intact, without cracks. All that taught me was how to take care of an egg. Step 1. Put it in the fridge. Zero tolerance policy is the dumbest thing ever taught and implemented. All it teaches is to fear authority when you're the victim. It enables the perpetrator, who is normally a bully. I know administrators are lazy fricks, but they need to actually investigate the goddamn problem instead of saying, hey, you both were involved in the issue, so you're both going to get punished. It basically just raises you to hate authority, and while I don't like authorities either, I don't think they're all distrustful. Although, I guess this could be interpreted as commentary on how garbage authority is. It also escalates situations. You're getting the same punishment if you retaliate or not, so you better make sure they think twice before starting crap with you again. Not a lesson, but they teach you to respect adults no matter what. That's how teachers get away with so much nonsense. It's how parents get away with abuse. Kids are taught to respect adults, but what they really teach them is don't do anything to inconvenience an adult. So a kid is more likely to keep their mouth shut if they're getting molested or beat. They need to teach instead that respect is earned and not to blindly trust people just because they have seniority or authority over you, that you have a right to make a judgment on somebody if they are doing something bad. 100% agree. This crap is what makes children think it's their fault when someone is treating them wrong, and it is so incredibly harmful. DARE was the single worst freaking useless thing ever taught at school, especially when the cop teaching said class ends up getting arrested for coke. Studies show DARE increases drug use because 1. When they realize DARE is lying about weed, they assume DARE is lying about other drugs, and 2. So much emphasis on resisting peer pressure makes kids assume everyone is doing drugs, so they have to do them to fit in. That sticking up for yourself is wrong. I punched a kid in the face because he was being physically abusive to me. He grabbed my arms and spun us in circles, intending to let go once I would be sort of thrown through the air. I got an arm loose and punched him in the face before that happened. Instead of him being expelled, I, a female half his size, was forced to apologize for defending myself. I'm still freaking mad. When I was a little girl, my dad always told me that as long as I didn't start the fight and only ever retaliated to physical violence, I would never be in trouble with him. When I was 11 and did end up in a physical fight with a boy, my dad told me after that he was proud of me for sticking up for myself. His opinion always meant the most to me. We had written finals in high school for PE. It was so ridiculous that even the PE teachers didn't really bother reading our answers while grading the exams. Example questions. A friend of mine answered, describe the history of the football, with an elaborate answer about how a guy stuck on an island kicked a coconut, and due to a quantum anomaly, his foot fused with the coconut. This led to the birth of the legend of the football. Another friend answered, what is an aerobic exercise, with a drawing of a man doing push-ups in the presence of a chemistry set creating oxygen via hydrogen peroxide, and drew arrows to them labeling the reaction and the push-ups as aerobic and exercise respectively. Another friend answered a question about things to keep in mind when trying to eat a balanced diet for health, with points like try not to eat a brick wall. Only one of them failed. One of them had their final exam sheet framed. I want to hope that it was the aerobic exercise that had failed. It'd be funny for the other two to pass, even though the aerobic exercise was probably the closest answer to being correct. That if someone's bullying you, you tell them that you don't like it. Like no crap. That's why they do it. My grandmother used to tell my dad, my brothers, and me, if someone hits you, tell them you don't like to get hit. Most useless piece of advice that has been taught to society. Edit. Fixed a typo. When I was in primary school, we got taught about digital roots. It's where you take a number, add up all the digits and repeat if you have more than one digit. So 684 equals 6 plus 8 plus 4 equals 18 equals 1 and 8 equals 9. Nobody else has ever heard of this. It's useful for a rather niche video game, lol. Our elementary school was heavy into unicycles. Gym class year round was learning to ride, then ride together, and in formation. I was one of the unlucky few who never got it. I can't dance or ride a bike either, so I suspect there's some balance issues. School all but threatened to hold me back a year until I learned how. Everyone forgot and never picked it up again as soon as they moved to middle school. Worst part is that we were a very poor school in a very rural area without much funding. I can't imagine how much the school spent on those unicycles. There was no sponsorship, and we weren't competing in anything. That the female body will shut down during rape and she won't get pregnant. Thus babies cannot be conceived during rape. Catholic grammar school, Northern Ireland. Freaking useless. Factually and ethically wrong. Not exactly something they teach in general, but in my high school music class, we had to memorize our national anthem in a different language. We used to be a colony and it was originally written in the colonizer's language, and then sing it out loud with the same melody and all, except you're parroting a bunch of words that you don't understand. Over a decade later and I still think it was a pointless exercise. Square dancing. It was put into the curriculum at US schools after heavy lobbying from industrialist Henry Ford. He didn't like the awful, new modern dances people were doing, like the Charleston. I had totally forgotten that I learned square dancing. What the frick was that? My old high school decided that PE wasn't important, and instead of having 2 periods where we would be exercising and learning about the human body, they made us take spiritual development. I hated my old high school. Sounds like they took the high part very seriously. I'll chime in from a teacher's perspective. A lot of what I teach is to eventually prepare students for calculus. Yet most of my students will never take that class. So instead of having fun in math and exploring patterns, properties, problem solving and reasoning logic, we have to make students memorize everything since we have too much to teach. Memorize this formula. No, we don't have time to explore how to derive it in any meaningful way. Plug numbers into here. No, we don't have time to figure out what these numbers mean nor their significance in the world. This stuff is useful in the real world. No, we don't have time to actually explore that stuff. Here's a fake real world problem instead. This math revolutionized the world when it was discovered. No, we don't have time to explore why most kids who struggle with math, in my experience, struggle because they don't have a concrete understanding. It's just memorize math facts and learn to plug the correct numbers into the equation. I'm guilty of all of these sins as a teacher, but the job ahead of me really makes it difficult to do fun stuff in math. There's a long list of reasons why students feel school isn't worth it, and I'm with them in many cases. What we can't fail to forget, though, is school is better than no school. At my school we do many things poorly, but poorly done is better than not done at all. So yes, room for improvement, but please don't give up on the school system. In phys ed they had us take actual written tests a few times sitting on the gym floor. Questions like where was basketball invented? What are the rules of pickle? Yada yada, other useless crap. I took an intro to bowling class in college as an elective, and we had to have an actual final written exam with questions like where was bowling invented? It's less useless and more actively harmful, but the way drugs education was taught when I was growing up was straight up nonsense. All drugs are bad. Okay, alcohol is also a drug, and it can definitely kill you, but it's also fine for some reason. Don't question it. And weed is just as bad as H. All you need to know is that anyone who even looks at a joint is a morally repugnant junkie, and they're destined to have more children than teeth on some council estate, or will rob old ladies to fund their deplorable habit. And that's if you don't straight up die from even being in the same room as weed smoke. The police definitely have your best interests at heart when they arrest you, so you should mark on anyone you know who might be doing drugs, because jail is the better alternative and it's always for your own good. Oh, and don't worry about what happens when you actually try drugs, because even though you might find a glass of wine or an edible is actually pretty great, you're almost certainly going to start to wonder if maybe H&M aren't that bad either. Are they? Can you trust your teachers? WHO frickin' knows. Also, I was led to believe that way more people would offer me drugs that I could just say no to than ever have in my life. Drugs are expensive, y'all. Someday, someone is going to come up to you and ask if you want to do drugs. They'll make it seem like it's cool and fun. You should just say no. It's that simple. Just say no. Otherwise, you'll end up in jail, doing 20 years, because you got high that one time. That experience never happened. Not even close. In my country we do religion, and don't you dare argue with a teacher or ask any questions cause Jesus is the only answer. But you said Jesus is the answer. This is a math test. Not to chew gum. On a more serious note, that hugging and public displays of affection are bad. Ask me how many times I got detention because of this. Chewing gum is probably not an educational rule, but rather a custodial rule. Those guys don't get paid enough to scape off your nasty chewed up gum. Primary school, age 4-12. If two kids never liked each other for good reasons, the teachers used to force you to be friends, which usually made it a lot worse. So, you're not allowed to dislike people, even if they're mean to you. Secondary school, age 12-16. Getting good grades is more important than your mental health. You get people in this thread saying teaching algebra or proofs is useless and simultaneously demanding that schools should teach critical thinking. Abstinence-only sex education. Basically just ignoring the fact that teens will have sex instead of teaching safety and consent. In my psychology class in high school, we literally spent 2 weeks learning about 9/11, like the event and the aftermath. Nothing about the brain or how it works. I learned a little regarding 9/11 in one of my psych classes in college only because it was a super impactful event, so it was a good example of one of the definitions. At my school it was a whole semester on the Dewey Decimal System. This was in the late 90s too. Computers were becoming the norm, but our old librarian refused to accept them and the school admin didn't care. What a complete waste of time. I don't think what schools teach is useless. They just tend to kind of hide the real point, which is learning how to learn and how to think. The focus shouldn't be history. The focus should be how do you learn history? What they need to do is stop being outdated. Stop making kids write in cursive if you know the world moves toward typing. Stop making kids do math in a particular way when there are usually many ways to solve a problem. Adapt. Vet your teachers to root out political nuts and glorified babysitters. Are so much to do, but it's gotta be made a priority and it just isn't. There are likely a wide variety of answers you'd get from this question, but education isn't necessarily meant to provide just a means to an end, i.e., something useful. Education is about broadening our view of the world, teaching us what all is out there, and showing us there is so much more than what we see inside these four walls. Teaching us about what astronauts do on the ISS isn't very useful information for many of us, but it's incredibly interesting, and it shows us that there is amazing value in exploration, discovery and further learning. Earth is an ever-changing and beautiful planet, and its inhabitants are even more fascinating and entertaining. We'd likely never know any of this if we didn't study and learn about everything that's here. Yes, some of it is kinda boring, and maybe useless, but it all adds to the depth and breadth of our ability to think critically, and more objectively, about all things. That was my initial thought as well, and I was ready to come into this thread and be outraged by the responses. Then I read unicycle, and yeah, that's fair. If you're getting bullied, come tell a teacher. Then the teacher either does jack crap or they just tell off the bully and nothing more, and then you end up in trouble for retaliating. In middle school we had a rule that you couldn't stop at your locker in between classes. Their logic was that you should be prepared with all of your books and stuff for the rest of the day, but my locker was 5 feet from most of my classrooms. I argued that it shouldn't matter as long as you're on time and prepared. My youth left me with a deep disregard for authority that continues to this day, lol. Pledge of Allegiance was another goofy thing. Seemed like early indoctrination into the cult of US nationalism, but they acted like it was just normal stuff. Needless to say, we quickly found out that you can just sit and stay quiet and they couldn't do anything about it, lol. I don't know, but if they don't start teaching people how to spot fake news soon, we're all gonna be living under dictatorships. I think a lot of literature, the problem isn't that they teach it, it is that they teach it without context. For example, why is Old Man in the Sea so important? Most classes go read this book. The kids read it and they go, this crap is boring, why the heck is this important? How stupid were people back then? The context of the various novels we read in classes is very important, and I think many schools gloss over that and leave the students no clue why a book was so important. See also, making a bunch of 7th graders read Shakespeare, with no context given for his significance, no help given on any of the archaic language, and completely ignoring the fact that plays are best understood when watched, and there are dozens of tape performances of all of his works out there. That they have a zero tolerance for bullying, but they never help out the kid that's being bullied. Once the bullied kid fights back, suddenly they need to step in. There was a personal finance class we had. It was heavy on real estate, buying homes, income properties, being a landlord, etc. That's not in itself useless. What was wrong is they skipped balancing a checkbook or budgeting your spending, how to do taxes, how loans work, the basics that you actually should be proficient in. So graduate HS, take out a ton of student loans, rack up the credit cards. SAT prep. It was that weird period between the old SAT and the new SAT. The teacher who taught the language section of the SAT prep was a terrifying woman and I hated every moment. The teacher who taught the math section only taught what was on the old section. I didn't know what I wanted to do in college anyway. I just wanted to go to a 4-year school because it seemed respectable. My mom pushed me towards community college. She figured let me find out what I wanted to do and we wouldn't have to pay an arm and a leg for introductory classes. I got my period the morning of the SAT too. It was one of the worst periods of my life. I couldn't concentrate and failed the SATs. I ended up going to community college for the introductory classes. The market collapsed 2 years later, so it was whoever could afford real college at that point. Mom also saved me from student loans by doing a HELOC when I transferred to a 4-year school. But if I had to do it all over, I'd do community for all 4 years. My mom to this day still tells me ooh that's a SAT word even though I took it the year they changed it. Thank goodness I never had to memorize the meanings of thousands of complex words. History, but only because of the way it's taught. At least in America, my history education was not much more than a patriotic, Southern, propaganda class where I memorized dates and names and the fact that the Civil War was fought over states' rights, not slavery. I truly think the only useful thing we learned in history class was things surrounding the Holocaust. The rest was more or less independent factoids about parts of history with no context or connection to one another. Recognize my experience is not something taught in every school in America, but it's common enough in my region of the states that it's contributing to serious problems. And my experience wasn't that long ago. I graduated high school in 2015. Standardized testing. This has to be the biggest clusterfuck of all. They literally teach kids to test. Not everyone learns the same. Why does standardized testing still exist? Pretty much all of the things that I thought were useless at the time turned out to be very useful. Algebra, trigonometry, literature analysis, and I truly wish I had tried harder in gym class so I could actually play some sports. What I learned that was worse than useless was the 7th grade level American history. It taught me that 1. American history is super boring with a bunch of stamp accent crap to memorize, and 2. An absolute boatload of non-nuanced stuff about things like just about every war we were ever in. So I emerged not just ignorant and misinformed, but not wanting to ever learn more about it. ETA. Thanks all for your concern, but I was fortunately saved from my ignorance and apathy later in life. First, it was by taking AP American history taught by an eccentric and interesting teacher. He also passed on some misinformation, but by then I had the tools and the interest to get more of the story. And secondly, my father, despite not growing up in the US, is quite the scholar of our history and was able to give me a better idea of things. I consider myself to be quite well informed on the topic now. I'm from the UK, so maybe I'm a bit different, but I always feel none of our subjects are bad. They just spend too much time on things that don't matter unless you pursue it as a job. For example, I did food technology and I was not taught how to cook meals, but I was taught how to make a label showing much of the percentage of salt etc. in the meal and how to cut down on salt. But no one taught me how to make a stew. Not complaining, I was lucky. My parents taught me how to cook basic things and encouraged me to look at more. But so many subjects are like that, with stuff that's not necessary. I really believe the first few years of high school should be things you will need in the real world, because if you leave school you can get a basic job and survive just fine. But not if you have no idea the chicken can't be pink in the middle and you die of food poisoning. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.